business went from 2 million to 130 million in 3 years. I think that's like insane, phenomenal growth.
I will work for $30,000 a year, but like I want to be an executive right now. The idea, there were like 4 other RXBARs. We just were better. You got to be in it because you like it. We'd fire people in training. So the first 2 weeks at RXBAR you spent in customer service. We'd be like, hey, it's Whole30, hey, it's paleo. And like these people couldn't have cared less. And we'd just say the ingredients. And every single person like lit up. The name RXBAR is actually a problem because retailers back then wanted to put it in the pharmacy set. That's like death. We were uniquely profitable because we had never taken any outside money. So we'd never been able to waste any money. We were super efficient and it was a really good business.
Sam, super excited to have you on the show today. Excited to dig in. I have been a longtime user of both the products that you help bring to the world. So really excited to learn a lot more behind the scenes and how you built those. But thanks for being on today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let me pause here for a second. This show is brought to you by Propel. They find brands like yours exceptional marketing and operational talent in the US, Latin American markets, and beyond. For now, the links are in the show notes, and all of our listeners get 10% off your first hire. Okay, let's get into it. So where I always love to start is when you make that first jump into kind of a startup or startup world, take us back to the journey. From my background, but let me know if there's something before that. Kind of the first startup was RXBAR, but like, you were a very, very early employee there. So I imagine that business, looked like all very early businesses. What got you to take that jump into startup land?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I graduated from college, I was in finance doing healthcare M&A, and my wife worked for a PE shop. And my side of the business, we were merging hospitals and surgery centers and things like that. There's another side of the business that operated hospital systems. So my wife's PE firm bought this group of hospitals and they needed someone to come in and operate them. I found out about this through I was at a dinner with her team. And I effectively sold in this like $10 million piece of business my first year out of school as an entry-level analyst to a group that I didn't even work in. And so we sell in this big piece of business and I'm like, this is amazing. This is like me way outperforming expectations as an analyst. So I go to my MD and I'm like, hey, what should I do about this? This is obviously like not in the job description, not contemplated in my bonus package. And he's like, you got to go talk to the other MD. And so I go talk to him. He gives me this story about like how long he waited for his membership at a yacht club that he belongs to. And that basically told me to like take a hike. And I was like, so I'm about a year into my career in finance. Both my parents worked for big companies. They're not entrepreneurs. And I was like, I can't take this. Like, there's no way I can sit here after this. And so I called a guy who had been a mentor for me, who I worked for in the summers during college. And he had found this home security company to buy. And this was like Internet 2.0. So
what year is this?
This is 2009.
Okay.
2009, 2010. So I'm a year out of school. And so he's like, hey, I found these home security companies to buy. I'm going to go buy them. And here's the strategy. And I was like, I'm in. I will come do this. And I made him an offer because at the time, I'm a year out of school. I have really no skills to offer other than like, I'm going to work super hard. So I tell him, I'm like, look, I will work for $30,000 a year for 6 months. And if after 6 months, if you pay me $15,000 for 6 months, which is like gotta be below any hourly wage threshold. If I'm still an executive on the team, we renegotiate like a proper package. But like, I want to be an executive right now. I was 21. I graduated school a little bit early. And that was kind of my first operating experience. So we built these home security businesses. It was a direct-to-consumer home security concept. And we were basically disintermediating the installer of home security. And it taught me a ton about D2C, customer acquisition. And it was a great learning and how to win. The guys who I was working with were more seasoned than me. They were really good operators, super systematic, really, really smart. And that business ended up selling to another sort of like strategic in the home security space. And so it was the first experience for me of like, how do you just go into the void and then figure out how to win?
How long did that journey take from like starting it to like selling to the strategic?
Yeah. So it was maybe a 4 or 5 year process, something like that. And the exit was not like, RXBAR, which I'm sure we'll get to. It was not like that level of exit, but it was a win. Like we accomplished what we set out to, built a good business, were able to sell it. It was totally
that's
a win.
Always like, how important do you think? Because I always tell people like, yes, you do learn a lot from failure, and I certainly have had failures, but like you also like, I think underestimated is like small wins. You just learn a ton from like those teams. And like, even if you're a smaller like part of those wins, just like early in your career, getting on like teams that ultimately get to some degree of success compounds. And like that, I always tell people like when you're really young, like you don't necessarily need like the Facebook meta, like, like Elon, even Elon, who's obviously, or at least in my opinion, the best entrepreneur out there, like his first win was like a moderate win. But like that moderate win grows into the second win, the third win. How important do you think that first win was?
I think it's everything. I mean, you look at it, you see it in sports all the time where like there's just groups that are winners, like the Knicks, Jalen Brunson and those guys, they just win. Like they win at every single level. Jalen won in high school, college, and now the pros. And I do think that there's like a certain level of understanding how to win. That is super important. And at that point in my career, I was right at the beginning, totally impressionable. I was learning. Everything was new. And it definitely taught me, it gave me great lessons tactically, but then also just generally speaking, like, how do you win? It was huge. It was everything.
So going back, so there's this 21, it's funny because I had like the almost the same exact situation. I started off working investment banking and was so frustrated at like how slow everything went. And I just had this, like, I laugh now looking because like my hubris was just so huge. Like I felt like I was smarter than everyone. But it was that like desire to like want to move quickly, want to, ultimately also saw myself as like, I'm not going to do this slow and steady. I'm going to do this. But that definitely, it sounds like you had that. But then now as like more of a seasoned person, like now I'm often trying to rein that in a little. Like, how do you see, like looking back at that 21-year-old you, like, what areas do you think absolutely you had it right? And what areas do you think like, oh God, I've grown and just seen like, God, I had all these things wrong?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think like when you are more seasoned, there's a little more of a regulation of yourself. Like, like I know I can come out super intense and like the team can kind of be like, whoa, like this guy's emailing us at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Like, what is going on here? So you have to sort of like regulate certain parts or at least understand how you're going to impact the people that you're working with. Like that would be something. But back then I was just like charging. Like I was honestly so scared that I wouldn't be successful that I was like, would have done anything to just prove that I could do it. And now I think it's a little bit, I still sort of feel that same fear, to be honest, but, I think it's just a little bit more regulated in terms of how it shows up every day. Hopefully. I mean, you still have to bring like a lot of intensity in operating. I think it's important, but
kind of digging into that a little bit. Cause like obviously, and we're going to dig into your success, but like, you've kind of had multiple different levels of success. Just that statement you said is like, honestly, today I'm still like dealing with that fear. Like unpack that a little for us. Like, what is that like? How does that show up?
Yeah. I mean, I just think if you sort of are, if you're driven in a way where your first job out of school, you're 20, 21 years old, and you're walking into an MD's office asking for him to compensate you for something you did, and then leaving a career path when they don't. Like if you sort of have that in you. I just think every next level just unlocks the next one and the next one and the next one. It sort of never ends. And I think operating is that way, right? It's like one problem after the next. You just sort of like get used to that kind of cadence. And I think some people are totally built for it. Like I realize like I can't sit still and be happy. It's just not for me.
Yeah, I cannot agree with it. It sounds like we have a lot in common. People ask how much time I took off between Freshly and my next company. I said none. I had actually had them overlapping. And that's probably why I stayed married. Cause like, the energy for me is just like, I constantly need to be doing something. So I would be a nightmare if I was at home with nothing to do.
Yeah.
So you sell that business, a moderate, like let's say a solid stand up, single, double. And then how do you get introduced to RXBAR? Because at the time when you joined, I think employee like number 4 or 5. And then, doing revenue, but still very young, relative to where they got. Like, how did you discover them?
Yeah. So the home security business, taught me a ton about customer acquisition, D2C, and so on. And I have sort of a funny story in between where a good friend of mine reached out, and she's a recruiter, and she's like, "Hey, I have this client who I cannot get this recruiting thing over the finish line. Like I cannot find them a sales and marketing leader." She's like, "Will you just take an interview with them just so that I'm continuing to send them candidates?" She's like, "I know that you're not going to take the job, but we just take the interview." So I'm like, "Sure, no problem." And so I go take this interview with zero intention of taking this job. And it's with this company that's like a homegrown facility services business. So I'm in the home security space. This is like asphalt, concrete, roofing, and so on. So I talked to the head of commercial or head of sales or something, and it goes well. And he's like, "Hey, will you come back in and meet with our CEO?" And the CEO is kind of a known guy in Chicago. So I'm like, "Sure. Like I might as well. I've gone this far. I might as well like meet the CEO." So the CEO and I have this 45-minute interview that lasts 3 hours. We like completely hit it off. And he's like, "Hey, I want to put you in charge of all sales and marketing for the whole portfolio." So the business is doing like 200 million at the time. And it's a bigger business for me than I've been in. I'm like 24 years old. And I'm just like, and this guy's kind of a legend in Chicago. And I'm just kind of like, whatever, like, yeah, let's do it. This would be like a totally new experience for me. So I go in and I'm running sales and marketing for this portfolio of companies. And basically the concept was to take what we did in home security and apply it to another industry that had no one doing anything interesting from a tech standpoint. So this is like, 2012, 2013, call it. And it's like Internet 2.0, where digital is now impacting old school businesses. So what we tried to do is build like a more progressive asphalt and concrete business, essentially, from like a sales and marketing standpoint. And we did, and it was successful, but it was sort of plateauing. And Jared and Peter, who founded RXBAR, are 2 of my grade school buddies. And Peter was the best man in my wedding. Jared and I played basketball growing up together. They were the only 2 people I knew who were operators. And they had hired one of our other grade school friends, Jesse Stewart. And so they were all like grinding this out, super early days. They were working out of the warehouse, surrounded by pallets of bars. And it was basically a D2C CrossFit business. And I had learned from the live watch, the home security experience, that like, you don't need to like go in and like, at least my approach was not like, I need to go in and like negotiate my offer and my setup. I was like very much in the mode of, I'm in this entrepreneurial mindset. I'm just going to start kind of working with them. Like I'll come in on nights and weekends. They're my friends. There's a ton that I had learned in the live watch experience that I thought applied well to RXBAR. So I just kind of started working with them. Like it wasn't even like, "Hey, I really want to do this with you." It was just sort of like, we just started working. And then after like a month, they were like, "Hey, we should formalize this and you should come do this full time instead of just like on your way home from work and on the weekends."
That's all. And so it's funny, like again, another kind of crossover. So like in around the same time, you guys were definitely ahead of like Freshly, but so we were very much involved in CrossFit, me and my co-founder. And so and part of the reason I got into CrossFit, I was, trying to get in shape, and that's how a good fit. My co-founder's dad actually was really into the paleo diet, really kind of even before it was called paleo diet. He wrote a whole book on, and so I was just trying to eat like the paleo diet. And like, that's how we came up with Freshly, was like, okay, like having someone cook it for you. So our original, and then RXBAR, obviously, and I'd love for you to tell that, was like, you guys were huge in the CrossFit community. And so, we got introduced and we're like, oh, we're going to do the same playbook. So our actually original playbook was we had a bunch of refrigerators in CrossFit gyms. And then like very quickly, we're like, okay, this is not going to work. This is like a horrible idea. But we really tried to copy your guys' model. It was like, okay, we're going to, everyone in CrossFit was very indoctrinated, and still it's like, CrossFit was so smart to like realize that like nutrition plus exercise is like the gold standard. And so everyone was already like wanted paleo and paleo diet, but like, so that was already there a little when you got there, but like you guys took that to the next level. I mean, you guys were almost synonymous with like CrossFit.
Yeah. So like this was the amazing marriage of my past experience and how they had started the business. So Peter was like you. He's super into CrossFit. He was eating a paleo diet roughly, or like doing Whole30s. He was very much into that. And RXBARs, like in CrossFit, if you do the workout RX, that means doing it as it's prescribed. And that's like a big thing in CrossFit. It's usually very hard to do that. Not all the athletes at these boxes can do it. And so the product is really like, for people who know, it's kind of named like CrossFit bar, like that's kind of the origin of the name. Is RXBAR was a nod to CrossFit. So Peter, when he founded the business, when he first made the product, he would make it and then take them into his CrossFit box and like cut them up for people. So it was truly like a CrossFit origin. And in 2014, when I joined, about a year after they founded the business, it was almost entirely focused on CrossFit. So it was selling to CrossFit boxes and a D2C business that essentially serviced CrossFitters who found out about the product through the boxes. And so the insight that I think we all knew this, but the home security business was built with an inside sales team. So we had an inside sales call center in Kansas that would call people, dial for dollars, and email marketing was huge too. And so our first growth path was to basically rebuild that kind of inside sales mentality, but focus totally on CrossFit. And we never raised any money. So we didn't have the money to like go into traditional retail or build up a bunch of inventory. So we started with a like D2C plus B2B inside sales model that was supported by email marketing.
And so was that B2B inside sales was primarily still just getting more boxes, or were you guys branching out to like?
It was almost entirely focused on boxes originally. And we figured out, like you guys, for us, the refrigerator was the shipper. So we started realizing, like, if we sell them a couple boxes, they eat them, like boxes of RXBARs, they eat them and then they never reorder because they just sort of forget. And so we started giving them free displays, because when those were empty, they would automatically reorder.
Filled up, yeah.
And we had the economics down where we knew these were profitable accounts for us, and it could essentially fund the growth of the business.
And so, and I have these stats down, but let me know if they're wrong. Business went from 2 million to 130 million in 3 years. And I think that's like insane, phenomenal growth. But I also want to like go back to like, I think people don't appreciate that like the growth mechanics that you have today, like social media and stuff, didn't really exist at the scale we have. So like that growth at that time was like, you guys were at the front runners of getting that kind of parabolic growth, which is now a little more common. So, but like back then that was like so uncommon to do to do a bar that would be 30 years of growth from a bar company. And so to do it in 3 years is like just off the, and that was that really just predicated around this inside sales team?
Well, so it's funny because we thought we were so successful with this digital D2C model plus this kind of like niche, B2B channel through CrossFit. And we really only got that business to like $6 million. But at the time that was like
huge,
heroic, and Peter with David, they have done what we did in 3 years in like 15 months, and so the speed of this stuff has changed so dramatically. But back then we looked at RXBAR as kind of like the leader in the space. And that was who we looked up to from a tactics standpoint. They were like creating content and they had podcasts and they were like so ahead of the game on the content thing. And so I think in a lot of ways, we were on the very cutting edge of influencer. So we were seeding CrossFit people and fitness people like crazy. And back then you couldn't track influencer. And it wasn't like they had to say, hey, this is an ad. We were just like seeding everybody. And we weren't paying anyone really because we didn't have any money, but we were just getting the product into all the right hands. So we were really early on the influencer side of things, but we really only got that business to like 6 million in the early days. 6 million was like pure D2C, CrossFit and Amazon. And then we went into retail, and retail is what really drove that growth.
Yeah. And I think the amazing thing about like RXBARs is certainly CrossFit has got like kind of like the bro rep, but what you have seen, like when you look at Quest or other bars that have really originated from like pure fitness, like of that, they still stay very in that niche, like but like you guys really were able to like jump over to mass stream. I think part of it was like your bars are phenomenal. So first, I mean, obviously product market fit, you can't fake that. But then the second thing was like I think the principles of like just all natural and like I loved like when you guys think, because again, like you guys did so many things that were groundbreaking, but like one of the groundbreaking thing was like the label, like, and you guys like continue to evolve. And when did you guys get to where you just listed like the ingredients on the front of the label? Cause that was the thing to me that was like, this was before it's, again, all these things like you guys were one of the first to do that, where you just like put the ingredients and they were all natural and they were on the front, and like you guys really owned that fact. And I think like that to me is like one of the biggest things, at least for me, is because like the name is like very like you wouldn't think that name is a crossover name, and your product was such a crossover product.
Yeah, it's funny. In those early days, so when we were building the business, D2C and CrossFit, we always knew that wasn't going to be enough. It was a small market. And we had bigger ambitions to build a bigger business. So the question for us was always, how do you cross the chasm from this niche to the mass market? And we knew we had product market fit for paleo and Whole30 people. And we thought that clean label plus protein was a winning formula for the mass market too. But the question was always, how do you explain the product? And the name RXBAR is actually a problem because retailers back then wanted to put it in the pharmacy set. And we were like, we do not want to be in the pharmacy set. That's like death. And so when we repackaged, we capitalized the X so that it wasn't like uppercase R, lowercase x, which feels like even more tied to prescription. And what the main challenge for the repackaging was, how do you communicate the value prop in a way that speaks to the paleo, CrossFit, Whole30 audience, which had gotten us there. So they don't think, hey, RXBAR has changed or left the kind of the mission, but it doesn't say paleo because people don't think paleo things taste good. Or they're like, I'm not paleo, so I'm not going to eat that because it says it's for paleo people. So listing the ingredients on the front was the translation of that. It was, if you're a paleo person, you read these ingredients, you go, okay, I can eat this. And if you're a mass person, you're just like, okay, egg whites, almonds, dates, cashews, like that looks clean to me. And there's 12 grams of protein. So it was always a question of like, how do you communicate it? And there's a funny story. So what really drove it home for us. So on the back of our old packaging, there was like these little icons that showed 2 eggs. And back then it was half a fig, but it showed those core ingredients, but it was tiny, like a little thing on the back of the pack. So we would go to these, we would demo all the time in Chicago. Like we were just cutting up bars for people anywhere they would let us do it, CrossFit gyms, wherever. And our friend from high school called us and she's like, hey, I'm running the co-op at this condo association and we're doing a condo association meeting. Do you guys want to demo bars for this condo association meeting? And we're just like, yeah, like we'll literally show up anywhere and give people bars. And so we're doing it like we always do at this little tabletop. And I'm standing with Jared and we'd be like, hey, it's Whole30. Hey, it's paleo. And like these people couldn't have cared less. Like they were just like, okay, cool. And then we'd be like, and we just say the ingredients. There's egg whites, almonds, at the time, fig and dates. And every single person like lit up, was like, oh, like you could just see them understand. And so we took that learning into the design process and we're like, this is really what we're trying to communicate. And it came out that way.
When you guys did that, did you guys use a branding agency who kind of helped you flush that out, or did you guys do that internally?
Yeah, we used these 2 guys who had left Leo Burnett. One's a creative director and the other's a copywriter. Their name's Scott and Victor. And they're a small independent crew. And we worked with them on it. And a couple of the alternate paths are behind me. I got like the original prints framed up into this big piece.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's sort of funny to see like the other directions that were offered up.
So I think this is kind of like, to people, early founders or potential founders out there, like I think similar journey for Freshly. So we originally actually started, our title was F3 Foods, which stood for Fresh, Fast, and Fit. And so very, very similar. We started kind of selling to gym people. So we were like, and they already got it. Like we were, again, selling in boxes. So it was like paleo and like there was no further education. So it was like very aligned. And then very similar, again, like the hustle culture, like we didn't care who would buy our product. So we would just go, we would sell everywhere. And we went to literally any county, any fair, anything that we could solicit to people. And very similarly, what we realized is like we would say paleo, but then you got to educate someone on paleo. And they were like, and so then it became like, we were like, okay, it's just fresh, all natural. So like, and so fresh, all natural. And then what we realized is like, people are like, oh, it's fresh. It's fresh. It's fresh. So when we did the rename, we were like, well, what, like people were like, well, what do people care about? It's like the number one thing is fresh, like the number one thing. So like, and again, I always tell people like, it really helps on doing a branding to tell an individual who's like really good at this. And this is what they do for a living. But so we sat down with this great team called Tether, and they're like, well, what matters? And we were like, okay, paleo, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, for people not doing this, what matters? And we're like, fresh, all natural. So they came up with the name Freshly, and immediately we're like, yes, that's it. Freshly. It's like, that's the name we've always been looking for. But it was crazy because like, and very similar, we started very narrow. I'd say we probably only got to about $1 million in like the CrossFit kind of very focused paleo. And then we switched to Freshly, and it was just like a rocket ship. And because what we realize is, and I always think like the hard part for founders is like, you have so many things about your product that you're obsessed with and you're fat. And like the mass consumer actually only cares about 1 or 2 things. And your job is to like figure out what are those 1 or 2 things. And then you can always layer on after like what the things are. But there's usually like people have room for 1 thing, maybe 2 things, but they certainly don't have room for 10 things. And anytime you have to educate them on the sub thing, like that never works if you want to go mass, at least in my experience.
Yeah. And it's like a classic strategic framework of what are you not going to focus on that seems like it could be sort of useful. Like for us on the front of pack, we removed gluten-free, non-GMO, paleo. We put it all on the back because we were like, the only thing we want them to see is clean label and then a protein call out. And like, that's it. And everything else they can learn after the fact. But I see so often, we call them race cars, these products that come out and look like race cars. They've got badges everywhere. And it's like, you clearly have not really committed to what your value prop is.
We did the same thing. I mean, so we were my co-founder has celiac, so we were always, because we were like our first customers, so we were 100% certified gluten-free. So we were like, oh, everyone's going to care about this. Like, we're going to put this, and we had all these labels. And then slowly we just realized, like, remove, and just put all natural. Because like for us, that's all our, and so everything, to your point, is noise. And the more noise, I think people think it's additive, but it's actually reductive. Like, what you want to do is just like, and this is one of the like early lessons as a founder, because you want to tell more. And you're like, oh, and our product does this, and it's like, get rid of the and. You can only say one thing. That's it. And that's what people anchor to. But it's always challenging for founders, because like you're in love with your product for like 50 different reasons. But it's an interesting exercise. I mean, that like, again, I was following this like, before you guys had done that. And then after, and then it was amazing to me, because we were like, again, I was, deep in the CrossFit. So like we were part of that early 6 million revenue. And it was amazing when like all of a sudden, like people are showing up to the office that are absolutely not into it, but they're like, I love this bar. You got to try this. And it was like, wow, these guys really figured it out. What are some, because like, I think it's always easy hindsight to look back, and I'm sure everyone's like, oh my God, you were so lucky you joined this bit. Like, whoa, I want to do that. But like, I think what people forget, like when you joined that business, I'm sure your parents are like, don't do this. What are you doing? This is a mistake. Like, give us some of like the early scary things. Cause I always think like people, like there had to been a ton of them, but like when you joined that business, I'm sure it was not obvious that you guys were going to later sell this business for, multi-$100 million exit. Let me pause here for a second and introduce you to our title sponsor, Propel. Every business I've built has had a huge piece with international talent. And as we started building the Advantage, we wanted to bring in international talent focused around media, podcasts, and we started doing a lot of research, and we came across Propel, and we were really excited, first and foremost, to use them for us, and we later reached out as a sponsor. Here's the best part. It's all performance-based. You only pay one-off fee once you actually hire someone. That means no retainers, no ongoing costs, plus every hire comes with a 3-month guarantee. I think bringing on international talent is really hard, really rewarding. As we all know, bringing A talent onto your team is the most important part about building a business. And with Propel, I can speak for ourselves. They have been a huge part of our ability to recruit great talent to our team. Every Advantage listener gets 10% off their first hire. For more information, check out the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like, even when we sold, like right before we sold, people would still ask us, like, are you doing this full time? And we're like, yeah, we are doing it full time, very full time. But to me, it was the team. Like at that point, I'd been through so many of these like super entrepreneurial experiences that I wasn't afraid of something small. And I was confident that if you were smart and focused on the business, you could grow a business. Like, you can make good decisions. You can outcompete people. You can outwork people. It doesn't have to be the idea. Like, when we were in the early days of RXBAR, there were like 4 other RXBARs who were paleo, CrossFit, Whole30 focused, date-based plus protein. And we just were better. Like, we were outcompeting them. And the thing that gave me confidence in RXBAR was the people. Like, I knew Peter and Jared really well. I knew Jesse really well. And I just knew, like, no matter what, I'm going to be working with people who I trust and whose values I know are really strong. And I know that they're working super, super hard. And so I kind of figured the downside is, like, we make a pretty small but profitable CrossFit oriented business. And the upside is we get the timing right and we make a bunch of good decisions and, are super committed to it, and it goes really well. So to me, all, like, the way I think through the businesses is always almost through the people. Like, it's not through a P&L or like a strategic document. It's like, are the people the right people to work with? And do I align with the people? Because, like, when you're operating, like, you're in it day to day. Like, you got to really feel like the people next to you are doing the right things. Yeah. And I mean, I'd love your take, and I'd love to talk through kind of the acquisition, because people always ask, like, oh man, with that. And I was like, look,
there's no doubt, like when you're building a business and you sell, it's a huge moment. But I always like, my analogy is always like hiking and like climbing mountains. Like if you're only in it for the peak, then you shouldn't, like, no one likes, you got to really enjoy the journey. And to me is like, yes, you get to the peak, it's fun, but it's never as great as you thought. Like, oh my God, like, is it like, but what you really do look back, at least for me, was like the journey. Like the journey was like the fun part. Like I look back and certainly the economic benefits were awesome, but like for me, the people I met, the journeys, like we get our group together, and our group, like our core Freshly group is still like 50 people, and the stories, and we laugh, and you know, we it's fun to look at it with rose-colored glasses now, but you just laugh at like, oh my God, we were so crazy. Like we did. And I think that's my thing to everyone is like the best part about the startup journey is the journey. Yes, I'm in this game to win as certainly you are, but like you got to enjoy the journey. If you don't, get out of the game, because like that's like the rewards aren't fruitful enough, no matter how great they are, if you're not like having a fun time on the journey.
I completely agree. We got to the point when we were recruiting once we really figured out our recruiting and like what we were looking for, either Peter and I would do the final round, and it was always just pure values-based interview. And there's probably still stuff on Glassdoor about it, but it was a very unique approach to this values-oriented interview. And I got to the point where I was just like,
can you real quick just hit on a few of those things? Like what were like the value base that you guys would cover?
So we realized that finding the right people was so much more important than whether or not they could do a specific task, especially because we were growing so fast. Things were changing so much. We just realized if you weren't the right type of person, no matter how smart you are, you were just going to get run over. What
were those kind of attributes that you would say is like, right?
It was what we focused on was self-awareness, humility, but also confidence. And it's this unique blend where you kind of know where you're at, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you know, what you don't know. So you're humble enough to sort of like look at yourself objectively, but then you still have the confidence to act, because we were so action oriented and we were moving so fast. We needed you to act, but we needed people to say, hey, I don't have the resources, or like, I've not done this before and I'm going to drop a ball. Because when you're growing that fast, it's really like, can you basically not fall on your face? And we were running downhill so fast. We just realized we needed people who were really good in that environment, who could change quickly, who could adapt and learn. And so we tailored the whole interview process around that concept of like fleshing out. By the time it would get to one of us, all of the, we knew this person could do the job, like they could functionally do whatever job we were hiring for. But what we were trying to make sure of is like, you're not going to come in and be someone who can't handle the environment. And so I would start the interview by saying, hey, this is purely a cultural interview. Like this is about you as a human. This is not about RXBAR. And the second best outcome to us realizing like you're the right person is realizing you're not the right person, because we will fire fast. And if you sort of like do a good job on the interview, but it's not real, we'll figure it out super fast. And we're not committed to like seeing that through. If we realize we made a mistake, we'll fire really fast. And we did. Like we'd fire people in training. So the first 2 weeks at RXBAR, you spent in customer service, like truly in customer service, hands on the keyboard, no other job responsibilities. And there were a couple of people who were fired in customer service because they showed a lack of humility and a lack of attention to the customer. But so we'd start the interview, say that, and then we'd ask them this series of questions that was meant to sort of tease out, are you really being open and honest? And are you actually aware of what has made you who you are? And it was incredible. Like our hit rate was so high. We had almost no attrition. The team that we built through that process was absolutely best in class.
That's amazing. And it's so important. I always tell people, it's like, there's no such thing as good or bad culture, but you have to define what your culture is and then hire into that. And like, I think the companies that win own it on their sleeve. So whether you're Bridgewater or whether you're Patagonia, like you could not have more opposite cultures, but they hire to their cultures. And I would just say like what makes a company good is like you get people that are bought into that. And again, you could argue there's no right or wrong. Patagonia obviously did amazing. Bridgewater has done amazing, but they hired very different people. It's the key is it's just, and then authentically show up like that. And I think that's just like the key with building a great business is like, and you guys nailed that. And so when you think about that hiring process, you had two very senior executives do that last hire, just fully focus on culture for the stickiness. Like, and we're going to finish this story, but then do you kind of run that through now now you're an investor and advisor? Is that like one of your big recommendations, like period, is like really have that last interview done by a very senior person for culture fit?
I think the way you hire and the way you define values can be different. Like to your point about Patagonia versus Bridgewater, there can be different styles in terms of how you bring it to life. The main recommendation is that you have a clear culture. Like to your point, culture exists one way or the other. And so you're either crafting it and designing it very intentionally, or it is just existing. And if it's just existing, that's the worst scenario because you have no center of gravity and you don't know what the expectations are. So it doesn't have to be that the final round interview is exactly that way. And in our final round interview, like when we hired a real HR leader, she was like, you guys are going to get sued. And like, especially after we sold the business, she's like, you guys have to understand, like, you guys are now targets and like, you got to be sort of careful with this stuff. And we didn't actually listen to her. We were like, no, this is too important. Like, we're going to do it, but we hear you and we'll like sort of keep that in mind. But, I think you can bring it to life in a bunch of different ways.
So, and then let's pivot into that. So you guys get acquired by Kellogg for $600 million. How did that come to fruition?
Yeah. So we went through a very traditional banked process. So we went to a group of bankers, did a bake off, and then chose Janica from Piper. And she ran like a very tight, we'll send out a one pager, see who's interested. That'll bring us to 30 bidders. Those 30 will turn to 10. We'll do 10 management presentations. That brings it down to 5 final bidders. And then for us, those 5 went down to 3. And then those 3 were sort of the final bidders in the process. But it was like a very traditional banker-led process. And I think things have changed a bit. Like back then, we didn't talk to anyone really before, during, or after. Like it was like, she was taking this business to market and we were doing the management presentations and things like that. But yeah, it was a very traditional process.
I know the Piper team very well. Big shout out to the entire Piper team. They're great. But so obviously to run that bake off, you guys had decided, hey, we're ready to sell this. We feel this is the right time. Was that just feeling like, hey, you taking it to where you guys thought you could get it, or what was kind of the impetus to run that process?
Yeah, I mean, back then it was like if you got to 100 million and it didn't matter if you were profitable, you were a target for acquisition from one of the big strategics. And we were uniquely profitable because we had never taken any outside money. So we'd never been able to waste any money. We were super efficient and it was a really good business. We were in our late 20s. We kind of thought the range of outcomes for this business is probably between like 350 and 500 would have been like our guess going into it. And it just seemed like it would have been crazy not to do it.
Yeah. Frankly,
like we were young. We had done all of this. We had executed so well and it had gone so well. So that was kind of the impetus for it, really. It was like, we think there's a big opportunity and we'd be sort of crazy not to take it.
And then, so you guys ultimately go with Kellogg, an amazing, I mean, again, huge congrats on that. How long, like now you go, as much as I'm sure Kellogg said, hey, we're going to be hands off. We're going to let you guys do things. Then like slowly, things change. How long did you stay at Kellogg's in your role? And like, how did you feel about that whole transition?
Yeah. I mean, one of the unique selling points with Kellogg was that they didn't have a better for you arm of the business. Like General Mills had a better for you arm. Pepsi had different business units. And we were like, hey, we built this awesome team. We love our business and we want to keep going. Like we're not trying to run out the door here. And we think we should run Kashi and Bare Naked and all the other better for you brands that you guys have acquired over the years. And Kellogg had sort of publicly acknowledged that they had done a bad job of the Kashi integration. They bought it, they integrated it, they pushed it back out. They kind of missed the organic movement. And, so they were very aware that they had not executed all that well going into it. So we thought there's this opportunity. We have this great team, put these other brands under our leadership, and then we'll go out and acquire more brands. And Peter and I would sort of joke, we're like, one of us is going to be the CEO of Kellogg someday. You know, like we're driving all the growth in this business. And Kellogg, to their credit, they were really good about, they really did leave us alone. Like they didn't force us to integrate in any real way. They allowed us to like do our own thing. And they were a really good acquirer. After about a year though, we kind of, I'll never forget, Peter and I are sitting in this conference room talking, and we're just like, man, like we just can't get them over the finish line on some of these projects we want to move fast on. Like they just move way slower. And honestly, they should move slower. They're a way bigger business. It's a global business. Like there's real reasons for that. But we just kind of realized like, you know, this probably isn't the thing that's going to keep us fired up for a long time. And so we told them, hey, we think it's like time for us to transition out. And our CFO at the time moved into a president and CEO role, and he led the business from there.
Yeah, I think at least in my experience, again, N of one was very similar, where like even if the big machine wants to change, and they really do, like it's just hard. The big machine is the big machine, and to your point,
really
like I think, you know, as I've gotten, you know, more seasoned and see how hard it is to run, you know, big, huge organizations and all of the cogs and different thing going. It's tough. But I do think like, you know, you sell your business, you're handing over the reins and that person's going to do what they want to. And that's a part of the handoff, for sure.
Yeah. And you gain sort of a respect for them too, in a way that like we went in as these challenger company, and then spending some time there, you do realize like some of the criticisms are not necessarily, they are valid, but the business is that way for a good reason. Like they're running a huge global business.
And so people always say like, cause you know, I love the Nestle team. I think they're great people. We didn't necessarily see eye to eye on directives of how to do things, but like, you know, I always tell people like, the people of Nestle are really, really from the people working in the facilities to the top are great people. They really do care about like what they do, which is delivering food. And I think people don't understand the magnitude of like volume that they have. And we didn't. When you get into like production supply lines and you're buying wheat on a 6-year out because you buy so much that you like the Ukrainian war makes an impact on like your like it's just a different scale. And certainly there's tons of room and they would be the first ones to say there's tons of rooms and opportunity to improve across the board. But you do realize like it is turning a cruise ship first. Like we were like this little like hot rod, like, you know, speedboat, and we're like, oh, you could do the same thing. And it's like, oh, you get in the ship and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a different beast here. It's just like you know, not easy problems to solve, I guess is what I'd say. Is like it looks easy on the outside, and you get on the inside, you're like, oh yeah, these are really like tough things to solve.
Yeah, agreed.
So you leave Kellogg. You start, and I know we're also that I spent so much time there, so we're butting up against a little time. But so you start. It's Colter Ventures, right? Colter Ventures. And you start doing the investments. Walk us through kind of a little of the thinking there. Like you leave, you're an operator, but you know, it's hard. It's funny because like the whole circle, it's hard to take an operator out of an operator seat for too long.
Yeah. So Colter, when we sold, everybody was like, oh, are you guys going to raise a fund? You know, it'd be so easy for you guys to go raise a fund. And I sort of felt like, I starting my career in finance, becoming an operator, I had always thought I'll go back into the investing business at some point. But I want to come in with a real edge. I want to know how to operate these businesses and not just be someone who's studied them. And then I also felt like I don't feel good taking someone else's money before I figure out if I'm actually good at this. And so the first phase of Colter was me investing off of my own balance sheet in businesses, getting involved either at the board level or just as like an investor who they could call to figure out if I was any good at it, and had the good fortune of investing in a handful of really great brands that have done well. But along the way, I also sort of realized I don't love having 15 different investments that I'm sort of half in all of them. I really want things that I can go deep on. And so Colter has evolved to me looking for investments north of 50 million. And Kettle was the first one that where I had the opportunity to do that. And so Kettle, I'd been on the board for 8 years. The early investors wanted to sell, and we came to an agreement and invested just a little under 50 million into Kettle a few years ago. And it gave me the ability to really focus on it. So what I want to do with Colter is have fewer bets, bigger bets that I can spend more time on. And so the original at Kettle was me to be an active board member and be sort of involved, but from a board level. And over the last year or so, it's sort of, I've gotten more and more involved. And Brian Hack, the CEO, came to me a few months ago and just said, hey, like there's so much opportunity in front of us. He's a CFO by training. What if we do this together formally? You come in as CEO, I go to president and CFO, and we can lead the business together day to day rather than you being a board member who sort of flies in and out. And it was a no-brainer for me. I love the team. I love the product. I think there's so much opportunity for Kettle. But that's kind of the model for Colter now. Well, so for me to be the CEO, just to be clear, but for me to be a few bets,
concentrated. Yeah. And so first of all, on Kettle Fire, because I was also a very, very early adopter on Kettle Fire. I've had it in my pantry for 7 years now or whatever. My co-founder is like a very passionate front of the edge. And so Kettle Fire is bone broth. If you're not I think it's largely, at least that's what I use. I don't know if there's massive expansion beyond that, but I've always been on the bone broth. And for those of you who think bone broth is kind of this, like, why would if you've never done it, go out and order some Kettle Fire and replace it. I replace it at the end of the night with, I love this product. When my co-founder told me, hey, you should start using bone broth, he's probably one of your guys' like earliest, biggest advocates. I was like, there's no way. Like, I'm not like, I love the taste. It's like part of my life. I love it. It's been part of kind of like my whole recovery and how I think about like getting the collagen. And so, but a huge shout out there, because like I love the product. So to the original founders and what you guys are doing, I'm a huge fan of it. And I know it's still, you guys are still in like the early like awareness stage. It's gonna get to where like everyone's doing this, and you guys have, I believe, the best product out there. So again, I'm a huge. That's why I said at the beginning before we got on air, I was like, I'm super excited about this interview because like I'm an avid user of both products. So it's fun to always see the people behind the products.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And it's funny because Cutting Horse. So I started a venture firm, Cutting Horse, which is the same exact thesis, which is like, rather than do this spray and pray model, is like make concentrated investments where we as or current operators could come in and really like lend actual tactical advice. And what I saw as a person, as an entrepreneur, is like VCs had less and less operating experience. And it's not that they didn't mean well in their advice. It's just like, there's a difference between like what you learned at your MBA and what you actually see in practice. And so what I had at least found is like a lot of the things that I was being advised by people that had to be operators were like the exact opposite of what operators would say. It was like, hey, we need to expand. We need to do this. We need to go hire a CMO or hire C-levels. And it's like, no, we don't. Like, we need to like really radically prioritize. We need to make sure we get like very domain people in. No one, you're not going to hire yourself out of a problem. Like it's just like the exact opposite that, so it's funny. You saw that same approach of like concentrated investments, really bringing operator expertise. I always say like, look, we don't have a crystal ball. We've just made so many of the mistakes that we can tell you not to make. So like, that's like where, most businesses, I always say like 80 to 90% of business is the same. It's process, people, and then yes, there is that last 10 or 20 that's like the domain specific. But so but this second journey, you really joined now, one as like the CEO, but two a little later stage. Like how has this been different than kind of previous jobs?
Yeah, I mean, it's different in that RXBAR, I was part of the team that was part of that early core that grew the business. So I was sort of always there to anyone who joined the business. Kettle's a little different, but it's as close as I could get to that because I've been around the business for 8 years. So all of the leaders I've known, at least on some level, and the product and business generally I've known pretty well. And so coming in, it's not like I'm coming in totally cold as an unknown person as the CEO. But it is a later stage business than what RXBAR was certainly when I joined. It's different in that way, but it's also like people, process, staying focused. It's still kind of the same principles that run through it no matter what scale you're at. So to me, it feels similar, even though it is definitely a different scale.
It is funny how much like it's like the problems change, but they're still relatively the same thing. It's like you have to change constantly update the process because you get to scale. But it's like I always tell people, it's like more of like process. Then do we have the right people to execute the process? But at every level, it's like it's still whack-a-mole. I always laugh. It's like people would be like, when did you get to where like everything just ran smoothly? I was like, I've never seen that. I don't know if I've ever, like, I don't even as I joined Nestle, you realize like, it's just whack-a-mole. There's no state you get, at least I haven't found it, where like everything's just smooth and easy. Maybe you have a few days like that, but certainly not months like that.
Yeah. Well, it's like, if you love solving constant problems and getting almost no credit most of the time, like operating is for you. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like if you enjoy just sort of like getting kicked in the head repeatedly and just getting up and solving the next problem, that's really what this is. And like once in a while you have an outcome, to your point, like you reach the top of the mountain and then everybody, you're a hero, but it's like 99% of it was just a total grind. And so if you don't like that, if you don't want the grind, it's a really hard path. You cannot take the path to optimize for the outcome. You got to be in it because you like it.
You got to love, and I think you hit, so I look at like 3 skill sets, especially earlier companies. The earlier the company is one, grind. This is not like the realities are the only way to win as a startup is like you outwork, because especially if you're a young founder, because you don't know what you don't know. And the only way to learn is by doing. As you get older, and this is now your, third time, you do have a lot of shortcuts and you know a lot. So you could do a lot more effectively in your time. But like, I tell people like, look, when I was starting freshly, like I didn't know what a CMO was. I didn't know I didn't know. So like my only way was just to grind. And, it's like, it meant you had to be working 14-hour days. And it's not like set as like a hustler, like Cole or like Pride. It's like, no, that like, I wish I didn't have to. It was like, that was the, like, we didn't like everything was like learning on the fly. Like we didn't know anything. Like we had to, and so that grind is there. The second one is problem solving. You have to love solving problems. And you said this is like what we found is like consistent. And when we found this out later, when we asked everyone, what's the number one thing you love about working here? And our entire executive team said challenges. They actually really enjoyed the challenge. You got to enjoy that. Like they like problem solving. So those are kind of the 2 key things to me. And then we had another rule, which is no assholes. Cause like there's a degree of like, we wanted people to disagree. But like at the end of the day, no one likes working with like a true asshole. It's just like life's too short. And you could have a bad day, but you had to correct that. Like you couldn't keep showing up as an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So when you go, and then we'll wrap up. So first of all, congrats on everything. I mean, you're killing it. Again, those of you who have not tried Kettle and Fire, please go out. If you get one thing from this, just go try it. I promise you're going to love it. But if you're going to give advice, if we have young founders on this or people thinking about founding companies, like outside of everything you said on here, like what's the one piece of advice you give to people kind of starting companies? What is like the one thing you think people really need to anchor to or be aware of?
I think in those early days, you're so action oriented, and that's the right thing to be. Like, to your point, you have to just move through this stuff and learn, and staying super close to your customer in those early days. Like, CrossFit didn't end up building Freshly, and it was a great start for RXBAR, but the business would never have gotten where it got without moving beyond it. But spending time in that niche market and understanding truly the consumer and why they like the product helped us make every subsequent decision that allowed us to scale the business. So I would not be afraid of starting in a niche. It's okay to start there and spend a good amount of time figuring the business out in that niche.
And then two more questions, and I'm going to let you go. Again, very much appreciate you coming on today. Next question is: are there any things outside of work, but like that you think are important? Kind of, I call them like practical edges, like things that you've done in your life to really make you a better operator. That kind of live outside of your, the things you do outside of work that make you better at work.
Yeah, I mean, something I do in work, out of work, just like in life in general, is I feel like one of my superpowers is I will learn from anybody. Like there's everybody I interact with, no matter how successful in business or life or whatever, I feel like there's something I can take from them, either some perspective or some tactical learning. And I think that's a huge thing of being a good operator, is constantly sourcing information and parsing through it and figuring out what's good signal and what's noise. And that's one of those things, to your point, like in the early days, you have to grind so hard because it's really hard for you to know your first time through what's signal and what's noise, what's a real driver and what's a distraction. But as you go through that more and more and more, you get better at figuring that out. And so I think learning from all your different interactions is really key.
Final question. Is there anything the audience should be, outside of this, anything they should be listening to, watching, shows, podcasts, anything you think is just like, gotta have it on your radar?
Man, there's so many resources out there these days. I love Farnham Street. I think they're really good. I think Tyler Cowen, if you like economic stuff. But I would there's so much information out there. You just have to be a constant sponge.
Well,
and
Sam,
also you got to drink bone broth.
Got to drink bone broth. So first and foremost, if you get anything from this, go drink some bone broth. I promise you, if all you got from this podcast was that, you're going to be very happy you listened to this. So, but Sam, thank you so much for spending time with us. Congrats on all the success. Super excited to continue to follow Kettle and Fire and what you're doing. Don't screw it up. I've been a long time fan, so keep the machine rolling. But again, thanks a ton for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.